Hello, and welcome to another webinar with Natural Products Canada. Today, we are very pleased to present the third and final installment of the Startup Readiness Program with Grant Thornton. I have some key members of their team with me today: Nicole DeVoe, Ryan Morse, Louis Westergaard, and Jeff Merrick. For those of you that may not be familiar with Grant Thornton, they provide assurance, tax, and business advisory services in more than 130 countries worldwide. So they're definitely qualified to provide today's topic, which is planning for tomorrow today. Okay, so we've got a lot to cover, so let's turn it over to the team from Grant Thornton and get started.
Thanks so much. So good afternoon. Welcome everybody to part 3 of our Startup Readiness Program. Hopefully you've either attended or tuned in to parts 1 or 2 of the series, as this is a continuation of the startup business life cycle. So just to recap here, presentation 1 spoke to the seed and startup phase, specifically around making good financial decisions during that period, and offered the listeners some insight into the services that we at Grant Thornton can provide. Recap of presentation number 2, it delved into the world of obtaining funding and financing to get your business off the ground and running, specifically through government incentives. Today's presentation will focus on the growth stage of the business life cycle, specifically planning for the future today. We have 4 different presenters covering a number of different topics, all of which relate to the often fast-paced and ever-changing growth stage of a business. I'll start by giving you a brief introduction of myself, and then I'll have the rest of the team jump in before we get started with the material. I'm Ryan Morse. I'm a CPA CA. I've been with Grant Thornton for 12 years. My forte includes providing assurance services, which is just a fancy name for providing audit compliance work, including tax, to small and medium-sized privately held businesses. Today, I'm going to be speaking to the changes you can expect personally as an entrepreneur during the growth stage of your business, as well as some of the best practices for keeping your financial house in order during that period of change.
Thanks, Ryan. And I'm Nicole DeVoe. I lead our consulting practice here in Atlanta, Canada, and originally joined Grant Thornton in 2008. While in the business and technology and consulting practice, we work to help clients solve a range of people and process challenges. Today, I'll be talking about the importance of strategy and managing the people side of change.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. I'm Louis Westergaard. I've been working in public practice accounting for about 6 years now. Over the past few years, I've focused on business valuations and helping entrepreneurs sell their companies. I'll be giving a brief overview of business valuations, as well as the differences between fair market value and price, different transaction structures, as well as some exit planning considerations.
And I'm Jeff Merrick. I work within the business risk services practice. I have over 15 years experience providing IT security, consulting, audit, and transitional services to private and public sector clients. Today I'll be talking about reputational risks, the impact in the news, and how to manage and make sure you're ready when a crisis does come.
All right, thanks everybody for the intros. We'll get started with the material now. Highlighted in green are the areas that our presentation will be covering today. The bulk of which we focused on companies that are in the growth to expansion stage. To give you some context, our hypothetical startup has developed a plan, obtained the required funding, is now off to the races operationally and generating sales. Towards the end of the presentation, we will talk briefly on the exit stage, given the fact that many startups are acquired before they fully progress through the business life cycle in its entirety. So I'll now speak to how the change in your business will impact you personally as the entrepreneur. As your business changes and continues to grow, there will also be changes to the role you play within the company that may differ significantly from the role you previously played. Commonly, the shift or crossover is one from an entrepreneur to a leader within the company. As a result of this, there are some things that should be considered as follows: time, ownership, and delegation. As an entrepreneur, you're involved in the details, usually involved in every transaction and most likely every decision. However, as the company grows, the sheer volume of information may become overwhelming. You will not physically have the required amount of time in a day to complete all the tasks you are used to completing as an entrepreneur. One way to cope with this is to surround yourself with a team of people you trust, as this is key to freeing yourself of the tasks that should be delegated to the other capable members of your team. Moving into a leadership role may entail hiring new people to fill roles that are more operational or technical in nature, and that aid in allowing you to elevate your role to get you out of the weeds. An example of this would be a bookkeeper, whose responsibilities would be to complete the day-to-day accounting while providing updates and financial information that you can then use to make informed decisions. A revamped skill set. So communication here is key. When you bring in a team of people around you, when you may be used to working by yourself or in a small team, it can be challenging. Learning how to communicate in a way that allows for the delegation of tasks that achieve the same results as if you had done them yourself is the ultimate goal. On the flip side, being a good listener plays an equally important role. Working on both your soft and people skills will be key to this. Engaging in and investing in your people will become just as important as growing your company. Inspiration and motivation can go a long way to achieving the outcomes you are expecting. Strategic planning and change management are key skills involved in being a good leader. Nicole will be going into more detail on these topics during her presentation. And finally, having a focus on the future. It may be many years down the road, or it may be just around the corner if the right offer or opportunity comes through the door. On any note, planning for and setting your company up to run without you in the future, or even without you in the capacity of the entrepreneur, definitely helps to relieve the stresses associated with this transition. Removing yourself from operations and using your knowledge and guidance you gained as the entrepreneur will allow you to step into a monitoring role where you can provide oversight to the well-oiled machine you have built from the ground up. Later on in the presentation, I'll continue with the thread of focusing on the future when we delve into future cash flow forecasting. I'll now hand things over to Nicole to dig deeper into the growth stage of the business and what it looks like from a strategy perspective.
Thanks, Ryan. Success doesn't happen by accident. Our experience around the globe has taught us that regardless of the size, industry, or geographic location, planning and developing a unique path to success is crucial in every organization in today's competitive market. So what does that really mean? It really means that it can look like lots of things for lots of different organizations. And the reality is it doesn't matter what your strategic plan looks like. It needs to be something that works for you. The important part is that you're having those conversations and providing some level of focus to both yourself and your team and the actions that you're doing every single day. Your team needs to know what the strategic direction of the organization is. They can't help you get to that end goal if they don't know where they're going. Having a strategic plan allows you to focus on growth because we know that growth happens when you decide what you want to achieve, you build a plan to succeed, and you follow through on that plan. Nobody else can tell you what you want or the best way to go about it. Developing a strategy helps in other ways as well within your business. It provides a focus and a process for decision making. It allows you to assess individual performance and make decisions on compensations and various incentive plans. And importantly, most importantly, it gives employees a purpose. And we know that there's a strong link between employee morale and productivity and understanding how they contribute to success in an organization. So you're probably asking, what is it that I actually need to think about? We would suggest that you need to be thinking about some key pillars that matter most to your business success. And this would include what your strategic ambition includes, financing, i.e. how you're going to get there, where's that money coming from, where your risk exposure is, what your business operations look like, what the needs of your stakeholders include, and your people, so leadership and talent. So when considering those things, consider what success looks like, what the barriers to get there are, and what things you need to do to overcome those barriers. You then need to develop action plans, assign responsibilities, and regularly follow up on your progress against those goals. It doesn't need to be fancy, and you don't need to spend a lot of money to develop a strategy. The important thing is that a strategy exists. Key in this process is really understanding what can get in the way of you realizing your strategic objectives and what actions you need to focus on to advance that performance. As an entrepreneur, it's really important that you consistently hold your team members accountable for the actions that you've assigned them within the strategic plan, and you are having regular discussions about the progress that you are making. Recognizing that an objective in any strategy is often to either grow for purposes of a sale or growing to increase the value of your enterprise, I'm now going to turn it over to Louis to talk a little bit about how we determine the value of a company.
All right, thanks, Nicole. So as you can imagine, there are many ways to go about valuing a company. Today I'm going to go through two of those primary approaches. The first that I'll be talking about is an asset approach, and that's used when a company's asset value is greater than the income value from its cash flow stream. This can often be used for real estate companies or investment holding entities, really anything where there is more value in the underlying assets. The other approach I'm going to talk about is an earnings-based approach. This is best suited for profitable companies where the value lies within that company's anticipated future cash flows. So on the asset-based valuation method, that starts with balance sheet amounts for the assets and liabilities, and it's then adjusted for the increments that are either above or below the fair market value. Under an asset-based approach, there's typically no goodwill. And what I mean by goodwill is that's the amount that someone would pay for the company over and above the value of its hard assets. So goodwill is a residual asset that will often come when someone pays more for the company than its underlying assets. You'll often see that under an income-based approach. So on this slide, I've shown the basic formula under an income-based approach to valuing a company. I don't want to delve too deep into the mechanics of the calculation at this point, but what I would like to talk about is how you can influence the first two factors. That's your maintainable cash flows, as well as your business risk multiplier. So, as I mentioned, the two factors that you can do to control your business value are focusing on the cash flow and the business risks. So, starting with maintainable cash flows, investors often base their valuations on the historical earnings in cases when history is actually representative of the future results. So you can showcase the maintainable cash flows in your company by having a history of successful operations. So that's like years of increasing earnings and a positive outlook for your company and the industry that it operates in. Another way that you can show strength from a buyer's perspective is having an increasing and preferably recurring revenue base, as well as efficiencies that will ultimately yield strong cash flows to your company for a buyer. Purchasers will be basing their valuation on the cash flows from your financial statements, adjusted for normalizations. So as I mentioned in the slide here, it's tough to get paid for items that might not be recorded in your financial statements that relates to cash-based revenue and so on. So it is important to ensure that you record all revenues and expenses in a way that they can be traced. The other factor here is the multiplier. So a multiplier is applied to maintainable cash flows in a valuation in a manner that the buyer will be basing their price. That's a function of 1 divided by a risk rate, and that risk rate is what's reflective of the risk for your industry as well as the company that you operate. There are a few things that you can do to be proactive and increase that multiple. Some of the aspects that I want to focus on here are things that you can do by securing favorable contracts with suppliers and your customers, which would guarantee pricing at a favorable dollar value, as well as recurring revenue, which would be able to be picked up by a buyer who acquired your company. So another aspect here would be having a strong reputation and also capturing a substantial market share. By having a strong market share, you inherently decrease the risk for a buyer who would purchase your company because you're already holding a strong portion of the market. And that therefore reduces the risk and in turn increases the multiple that would be applied to your cash flows. Another point would be the intellectual property and proven methods that you have ingrained in your company that are attributes investors will look for, and ways that you could add value to those and call them hard assets would be either by patenting them to an extent or making them difficult to reproduce. And if you're able to do that, investors might be willing to pay more for your company based on those value-added pieces. So ultimately, if there's a chance that you'll want to exit your company completely down the road, you want to make yourself essentially redundant to the company. Otherwise said, you want to run your business and you don't want to let your business run you. So this next piece here, I'm going to talk about fair market value versus price. So under either valuation method, the resulting number will be a range of values, which is typically defined as the company's fair market value. Fair market value is the amount calculated usually by a valuation method under what would be considered a hypothetical open market based on known facts and the economic conditions that your company operates in. Price, on the other hand, so in a live deal, there are several ways that the price can differ from the fair market value. I've listed a few of those reasons on the slide here, but essentially buyers will be willing to pay more for a company if they can have control in it rather than a minority stake. And that can also be impacted by the buyer and seller's eagerness to do the deal. So whether they're in a position where they have to pay back their bankers or whether they're happy and content operating the business as status quo, as well as the negotiating abilities. So you might sometimes find a case where there is a large buyer with access to significant capital and a company who is in a position they need to sell. So that can also affect the price. Another key part here would be the synergies that a buyer would be expecting to achieve out of the company, and by combining your business with. So I want to go over an example of price versus value here. The example I've chosen I find is a pretty good one, where Amazon purchased Whole Foods and paid a 27% premium over the share price at that time. That price actually represented 9 billion of the total 13.7 here was effectively goodwill, which was above and beyond the tangible value of Whole Foods as an operating company. The price that Amazon paid was based on the future value that they felt Whole Foods could bring to Amazon's shareholders. So in addition to the cash flows that were within Whole Foods itself, Amazon gained and obviously paid for several synergies. One of those major synergies was relating to Whole Foods customer data. Customer data is big business, as many of you know, and it's no exception here within Amazon's company. Amazon was very interested in the customer grocery buying habits, patterns, and correlations. This is all data that Whole Foods has captured when they were collecting sales right at the sales counter, and it was data which Amazon was in turn willing to pay for. Amazon was also able to centralize some of the purchasing through their economies of scale by being a large company with access to cheap capital, and as in terms they're able to get higher margins on Whole Foods after they've acquired that company. And lastly here, in terms of synergies, Amazon also gained a common synergy amongst many other acquisitions, and that was cost-saving synergies on marketing and head office functions by integrating Whole Foods into their own operations. So now, about just over a year after that transaction has taken place, Amazon's share price has increased substantially, and a part of that increase is due to the Whole Foods acquisition. Now, although I talked here about a very large company and a large transaction, these acquisition premiums often apply in private market transactions for many of the same reasons that Amazon paid more for Whole Foods. So now that I've talked a little bit about valuation and price versus value, I want to talk a little bit about deal structure. So there are many different ways that you can structure a transaction. Some of these structures depend on the nature of the company being sold and the negotiating abilities of the buyer and seller. But today I'm going to talk about two primary structures and the pros and cons compared to selling shares. I'll start off with an asset sale scenario. And under the asset sale, the buyer is simply buying the company's assets. The company still exists after the sale, except on that company's book, there will only be cash, and that will replace the operating assets. In turn, the cash that's on the book will be used to settle the liabilities and then ultimately wind up the company. One theme here is that buyers usually prefer to buy assets. And primary reason to that is because the buyer can be selective on the assets that they want to buy and those that they don't. Buyers also, under an asset sale, they'll benefit from what's called a fair market value bump. And under that, they're able to claim a higher fair market value on the assets than what's recorded in the financial statements. And that's for assets which have increased in value, such as real estate. And that'll help out the buyer from their perspective because they get a higher cost base, which means they can claim higher CCA on the assets and therefore reduce their taxable income. Another point in an asset purchase is that the buyer avoids taking on the acquired company's liabilities. From the flip side, on a seller's perspective, you can be liable, if you're the seller, for some significant tax costs when selling the company's assets. Part of that's due to not being able to use your capital gains exemption, and it's also because you're effectively taxed twice, once through capital gains on the specific assets, and as well when you receive the proceeds. Another important consideration when selling is that you'll still be responsible for all the liabilities if you're doing an asset sale. That includes your payables, your debt, and other liabilities which you might not have been aware of. So now on the other hand, I'm going to talk about a share sale here. And under a share sale, the entire company is effectively sold. If you're the seller under a share deal, you're able to use your lifetime capital gains exemption to offset the taxes on the proceeds compared to the cost base of your shares. So that's essentially you're going to have what you would have paid for your shares as a cost base, and then what the proceeds would be, and the difference you're actually able to apply a lifetime capital gains exemption for about 800 grand in 2018 now, and that will offset a lot of your taxes there. So it is beneficial to a seller on that perspective. Another point on a share sale is that all assets and liabilities on the books, as well as unforeseen liabilities, are transferred to the buyer. That includes loss carryforwards, if your company has any. So for many startup phase companies, if you have losses in your early years, those loss carryforwards can be very valuable to a buyer because they're able to effectively reduce their taxable income. For that reason, buyers might be willing to pay more for your company if you have taxable losses and they continue to operate the same type of company in the future. So from a buyer's perspective, one downside to a shared deal is that the buyer has to take on all of that acquired company's liabilities. So I just want to go through an example here of if you were a buyer, how a share purchase could hurt you and why it would be beneficial to a seller. Now, this example I want to add about here is, say someone buys a company that delivers a service. For example, let's take an automotive repair shop. After buying that company, down the road you find out that the auto repair service personnel incorrectly repaired a number of vehicle brakes. Now down the road, because of those incorrect repairs, the company will have to provide warranty repairs, so effectively get those customers back whole, for one, and if those brake repairs resulted in vehicle accidents, your company would be possibly liable for those lawsuits. As a buyer in a share deal, you could be on the hook for those liabilities. So that's an important consideration from the seller's perspective, and again, another reason why they would prefer to purchase the assets. So ultimately here, the buyers will typically prefer, all other things considered, to buy assets because they don't have to incur the liabilities and because they get a fair market value bump for tax purposes. The sellers, on the other hand, will prefer to sell the shares because they can use their lifetime capital gains exemption to offset the tax liabilities and and wash their hands essentially of other contingent liabilities down the road. So now that I've touched a little bit on valuation and piqued your interest in selling, I'm going to pass this over to Jeff, who's going to talk to you about how you can protect the value in your company by managing your reputational risks.
Thanks, Louis. I guess I'll have to get my brakes checked out. And that helps lead me into the next topic on reputational risk. So hopefully many of you have heard about reputational risk before. If not, I'll give a brief overview of what it is, how the media can impact it, how you can manage your risks, and talk about being ready if something were to happen. So what is reputational risk? Warren Buffett is one Wall Streeter known as much for his sage advice as his astute investments. Thinking about this quote on building reputations, I wonder what he was thinking when his Wells & Fargo company, one of his most well-known holdings, got embroiled in a controversy related to the creation of fake accounts. The problem came into full view in 2016 when the scandal involved the opening of millions of unauthorized accounts by the retail bankers. When it came to light, the then CEO and others were forced out or fired, and regulators were subjecting the bank to fines and penalties, and a number of large companies either reduced, suspended, or discontinued altogether doing businesses with the bank. This resulted in their reputation being severely tarnished. Maybe if his management team would have followed this quote and his advice, this wouldn't have happened. So how is reputational risk defined? Simply put, it is a threat or danger to the good name or standing of a business or an entity. Reputational risk is the risk of loss resulting from damages to one's reputation, either in lost revenue, increased operating, capital, or regulatory costs, or destruction of shareholder value consequent to an adverse or potentially criminal event, even if the company is not found guilty. Adverse events typically associated with reputational risk include ethics, safety, security, sustainability, quality, and innovation. Reputational risk can be a difficult term to understand because it's difficult to define. If we are talking about someone else's beliefs, reputation can be affected by our actions or what people think they know about us. Here's a simple example of reputational risk. Most people have a favorite local restaurant or two. They love the menu choices and the way the food is prepared. The waitstaff is friendly and efficient, and it's easy to recommend the establishment to others. If news were suddenly to erupt about health violations at that restaurant or customers who became ill after eating there, it would certainly affect the restaurant's reputation. For the short term, the restaurant would lose business. But for the long term, depending on the steps the owners took to correct the conditions, the business might bounce back in time. Failure to respond would result in the most loyal customers looking for a new favorite restaurant. For a restaurant, not publicly declaring the steps they took to improve the health or safety conditions would constitute reputational risk. Alternatively, the same restaurant could take proactive steps to publicize the correct conditions in the media, some of the public's trust. I'll share a story on that later on. Organizations need to be aware that reputational risk spreads fast, especially when the news is negative in nature. Organizations that take steps to assess their reputational risk and take steps to manage it may be able to effectively gain an edge over the competition. An organization's reputation is brought to life through the actions and voices of its people. Employees are generally the first line of defense against events or issues that could damage the overall reputation. They should be equipped as brand ambassadors, and its leadership's job is to set a clear tone at the top and invest in training and communications that emphasize the workforce's role in protecting and promoting the organization's reputation. Typically, organizations have a mechanism for employees to report risk and issues. However, a breakdown can occur in two places. Either employees are not aware that the mechanism exists, or they do not know what types of risks or issues they should report. Training and communication programs should be focused on raising awareness of what the company would like its reputation to be, what can hurt an organization's reputation, and the warning signals to look out for. Once the initial understanding is embedded, it's important that the organization continually emphasize the expectation of employees to protect, preserve, and enhance its reputation. Employees also can serve as offense, not just defense. For a company's brand, they interact with customers and other key stakeholders every day, providing a natural opportunity to reinforce the brand and shape perceptions. But that can also pose new risks. If employees are not telling a constant story, or if they're behaving in a way that does not align with the organization's brand promise and values, it can create confusion within the marketplace and adversely affect reputation. So training employees on what messages they should be sharing and behaviors they should be exhibiting is critical to developing that coherent story in the marketplace. So who out there has a great reputation? So looking at this list from Forbes' most reputable companies in 2018, you can easily identify good brands. So how do they do it? They effectively manage the risks. And that can be difficult. Thinking about the last few years, and that the stories in the news have been anything but boring, and if leaders on the world stage have learned anything, it's that reputation is a fragile thing. Events ranging from the outcome of the Brexit vote and the US presidential election in 2016 to the emergence of fake news and also the Me Too movement is hammered home that point. And now large companies are learning that lesson as well. So who hasn't handled things so well? Here's a story on United Airlines and how they became the world's most hated airline in just one day. If you recall, in April 2017, live footage of the assault of an innocent passenger by security personnel was captured and immediately posted on social media around the world, instantly making United one of the most hated companies in the world. Because the plane was still on the ground when this happened, cellular and Wi-Fi was still working, and despite some efforts to stop videotaping, a few angry passengers managed to capture the whole thing on their phones and then posted to YouTube and Twitter immediately. Undeniable, this evidence has given new meaning to the concept of virally. Hashtag United and even hashtag New United Airlines mottos started trending on Twitter in hours. Not the story you'd want to see in the news for, which leads me to the next slide. The impact of media in the news. Where online news is on the rise, the level of trust is not. Trust has long been considered an important factor that influences people's relationships with news. However, the increase in the volume of information available online, together with the emergence of new tools and services that act as intermediaries to enable interactivity around the news, may have changed this relationship. People with low levels of trust tend to prefer non-mainstream news sources like social media, blogs, and digital-born providers, and are more likely to engage in various forms of online news participation. And something else to consider, truth or facts matter less. If people trust your motives, they care less if you exaggerate. People are biased. They don't regularly listen to opposing points of view. The internet provides a platform where news consumers can find their own information, independent of institutions or news companies, compiling facts from various sources. This is complemented by social media, where users can also distribute news and form a public discourse. So what does it mean for you? Once people make up their mind about you, it is very hard to change it. Media is a 24/7 thing and everywhere. Stories have a long and impactful life once it's out there, whether it's true or not. You need to focus on keeping a good reputation. The next few slides will explain how you can do that. So how can you manage the risk? Starting at the tone at the top. Understand what you or management is doing about it. Knowing what the risks are to your organization and what you are doing to protect it. Understand what people want from your organization and make sure you are delivering on it. If not, figure out how. You don't want a crisis to manage you, so be prepared if one happens and know what to do. So what else can you be doing? Building trust attributes. Treat employees well. Have ethical business practices. Listen to customers' needs and feedback. Place customers ahead of profits. Offer high-quality services. And take responsible actions to address a crisis. So what is crisis readiness? It isn't about preventing one, it's about being ready for one. While managing reputational risk is important, it doesn't guarantee a crisis won't occur. Be prepared. Manage a crisis, don't let it manage you. If done right, it can actually enhance your reputation. And I'll give an example on that in a minute. What do you need to do it right? Well, have a plan. Short and practical is good. Consider all scenarios. Don't be surprised. Understand who does what, when, and where. Know the message that you want people to see. Trust your people to be ready, and test the plan. Here's an example of a brilliant response on a chicken blender. The public relations team at KFC had their work cut out for them after a recent chicken shortage and were able to see the funny side and respond quickly. The fast food giant issued apology on a full-page advertisement in UK papers following a shortage of chicken that forced hundreds of UK stores to close. The ad, featured in the Friday edition of the paper, included a comic reordering of the brand's name lettering to spell out FCK. I'll let you insert the vowel there. A piece of the ad read, "A chicken restaurant without any chicken? It's not ideal." Social media reacted positively to the advert, describing it as cheeky and the best apology ever. So closing things off, here are a few things to avoid in a crisis. Scrambling or not knowing what to do, avoiding the infamous no response or no comment, people providing conflicting statements, offering opinions before knowing the facts, and not personalizing the impact. I'll now pass things off to Nicole, who's going to go over organizational change management.
Thanks, Jeff. In times of growth and business evolution, there is inevitably going to be change of some description going on within your organization. We know that some people thrive on this disruption and the transition, but for many others, it will be a process to get them there. So what is change? It's all around us. In its simplest form, change is a movement out of a current state, so how you do things today, through a period of transition and into a future state, how things will inevitably be done in the future. It's all around us, in our home life, in our community, in our work, and it can be something that's internally or externally motivated. Sometimes it can be something small, or sometimes it can be a real dramatic departure from the reality that we know. Something as small as introducing a new health plan through something as big as the introduction of a new technology or a business process can create lots of anxiety for your employees. Regardless of the size, there will be a process that people go through, and there will be a variance in the speed at which people go through that transition process, and ultimately within their acceptance of the inevitable change. So change management really is about how we support our team members, both management and employees, from getting from today through to the tomorrow. So what's the challenge? Employees impacted by change only embrace that change, so that future state when the benefits are realized and there's value created for them. What this really means is that in the change process, leaders need to create what we would call in the change space a WIFM. So what's in it for me? As a person impacted by change, I'm only likely to accept the change and buy into it once I understand how it's going to impact me, whether that's good or bad. So how do people react to change? Inevitably, it is something emotional, and sometimes that can be good, and sometimes it can be very bad. Regardless of how logical the change may seem to us, or even if it will result in something positive, people have an emotional reaction to losing something that they understand and that they're comfortable with. Those implementing the change often underestimate how people will react to the change and how the change will impact them. So why do people react this way? When we encounter new patterns and behaviors, it pushes us outside of our comfort zone, and often we don't know how to deal with it or aren't sure that we'll be able to live in the new world. Notably, we can see that there's a misunderstanding about the need for the change. There's a fear of unknown. People are worried that they're not going to be able to actually physically do the work. They may distrust those implementing the change or what the future looks like. There may be a lack of communication, or maybe you've just been an organization that has gone through lots of change in quick succession. So it's your role as a leader to help those people understand and work through the process with them to alleviate some of this reaction. So what is change management? It really is just about supporting your employees that are impacted by the change through their individual transition process. Ultimately, it's about helping them feel comfortable. This may sound time-consuming as you move from that current state into the future, and trust me, it can be at times. But ultimately, if you need those people to buy into the process, it's an investment of time worth making. With proper planning, you can often address those would-be problems right out of the gate, increasing the likelihood of adoption and buy-in sooner. Ultimately, there are 5 building blocks of successful change, and we often call this the ADKAR model. In its simplest form, it's really 5 key things. It's about creating an awareness for the need for change, creating a desire for those impacted by the change to participate and support the change process. It's about providing people with knowledge on how they can change. It's about giving them the ability, so very often it's training or coaching or support to implement the required skills to live in that future state. And then lastly, once you've kind of gone through that whole process, it's really important to reinforce the change. So you don't want people to revert back to old behaviors. So you're probably saying, I'm not a change management expert. What really can I do? In its simplest form, there are 6 key things I think that you need to do. First is create a sense of urgency. Establish the why you need to change or what's driving the need for change. Secondly is to form a powerful change coalition. Don't do it on your own. Get a group of people that can help spread the message and create a positive environment. When their coworkers see that other people are buying into the process, change-averse employees are more likely to buy in. Third is to establish and articulate the vision. Know where you're going and let people know. Fourth is to empower others to act on the vision that you've created. This means removing obstacles, encouraging innovation, and providing them with training. Along the way, it's really important to celebrate the small successes. What may seem like a small milestone to you may be a really big deal for somebody else, so celebrate that. And lastly, reinforce the change. Don't allow people to fall back into patterns of old behaviors. Make sure that they know that this is the new reality. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you do nothing else, communicate, communicate, and communicate some more. We often say, if you think that you've communicated enough, you probably haven't, and you need to keep doing it. And lastly, I think it's important to engage those impacted by the change in the change process. By gaining an understanding of what's concerning to them and where they see the challenges, you're more likely to plan a more efficient change process. Because change is just as likely to happen to you as a leader, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan, who's going to talk about how to get your financial house in order.
Thanks, Nicole. These next few slides shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. However, it's often the little things that start off small but can turn out to be big problems going forward. One of the ways to prevent this from occurring is to have good financial hygiene. So I'll give an example of flossing your teeth to prevent gum disease, tartar buildup, and all those other things that can over time become very painful and expensive issues to fix as part of your dental health. Much like the example, there are a number of proactive practices you should be doing in your businesses, which at the time may seem annoying or painful, but that will aid in the prevention of negative outcomes in the future. Given that we are in the growth stage of a business, there are lots of changes, things are moving at a very fast pace, and your role is also changing, as previously discussed. Employing tactics to create good financial hygiene in your company is important for the following reasons. Accurate information. As a leader who doesn't always have time to be in the weeds of every transaction, you need to ensure that the data that is being presented to you is accurate, as it is on this data which your decisions will be based. Timely information. For many of the same reasons as having accurate information, having information available on an as-needed basis aids in the decision-making process, and depending on various external reporting requirement deadlines, it's always a best practice to ensure your financial records are up to date. And finally, a bookkeeping burden. When operations are in full swing, it's often hard to be engaged with the day-to-day record keeping. And as the POs and invoices start to pile up, it can be a daunting task to get back to square one. Maintaining a schedule to ensure good hygiene is being practiced by your company is key to ensuring you don't end up in this situation. Further, speaking from experience, there's a financial burden associated with a professional firm completing the organization and accumulation of your financial records instead of solely on the compliance work they were engaged to perform. Performing a periodic health check on the company is a best practice. It allows you to gain insight into how the company is performing or has performed against your goals and expectations. One of the ways to measure these goals and expectations are to develop KPIs. Key performance indicators are a way to measure what is important to the company. These are set during the business planning phase and are quantifiable measurements that reflect the critical success factors of the company. These can be customized to suit your goals. However, some common examples might be number of orders processed, gross margin achievement, wages as a percentage of revenues, or the completion of successful milestone dates. Financial information systems. So the majority of your KPIs require data to calculate them, and that's where a good financial information system comes into play. For most startups, a simple off-the-shelf software will do the trick. However, as your company continues to grow, a more sophisticated software will be required to track your KPIs and deliver the accurate and timely data that you need. A good information system will allow you to answer questions like, how much cash do you have? Is your forecasting accurate? Are there correlations between the aging of your receivables and your bad debt expense? Do you have the right amount of inventory on hand? And many other things. Finally, you don't want your system to be burdensome to operate, and therefore should spend time planning and looking at your options before you purchase. We're back on the topic of cash is king, which Louis spoke to earlier. We've added it in again in the presentation just to reemphasize the importance of the saying. Businesses experiencing rapid growth often burn through existing cash reserves to fund the accelerated activity the company is going through. When it's all said and done, the cash is spent, and although you're generating revenues through sales, you might not be turning those revenues over into actual cash in the bank, and therefore you're unable to fund day-to-day operations, which may include even in paying your own employees. Startups often don't fail because they're not profitable. It's usually because they run out of cash. That brings us back to a proactive hygiene exercise, cash flow forecasting. Cash flow forecasting is often seen as an exhaustive exercise when things are going good and cash is coming in the door. However, a good cash flow forecasting model in place is imperative and should be a key tool in your financial hygiene practice. As an owner, you need to have a clear expectation of the cash flow cycle requirements and be able to project and forecast the financial impact of the decisions you make for the company. Cash flow forecasting can act as an early warning sign for your business to alert you of cash shortages in advance of actually being in a pinch. If you find yourself in a pinch, some common responses should be discussing credit terms with your lenders or suppliers, discussing your payment terms with your customers, and following up on overdue accounts regularly. And if you have inventory, maybe the use of a just-in-time inventory system will help with those cash flow needs. The growth phase of a business life cycle is a very exciting time with a number of changes for the company as well as your role within the company. Developing a process and navigating these changes is key to a less stressful and more streamlined transition to get you through to the growth stage and on to the exit phase. On that note, I'll hand things over to Louis to dive into the next portion of our presentation.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So for many entrepreneurs, in the cases where you've started from the startup phase and you're onto the growth phase and so on, you're too busy working in the business to really work on it. So although selling your company might not be top of mind right now, I want to talk about a few considerations that can help you in the event that you might want to sell your company down the road. So from the beginning, a good strategy is to run your business with the mindset that you might want to sell it at a profit one day. Even if you don't end up selling the company, chances are that your company will be more profitable by putting yourself in this mindset. Try thinking of your company's value from a buyer's point of view. Buyers want to understand the company's value if you, as a founder, were not in that company. That means you might have to transfer some of your knowledge and processes onto other management and team leaders. Buyers also like customer contracts and long-standing relationships. Customers should stand by your products and your services and not necessarily need you there to serve them. Ultimately, buyers will want to buy your company's future cash flows. The more you can do now to make sure that those cash flows are achievable with minimal to no involvement from you, the better off you'll be. So with that said, there are several ways that you can exit a company. Sometimes there is a natural progression to a family member that you have either in the company or one of your kids who might want to take over the business after you. Maybe you have a member of your management team who could be a strong leader and they would be able to secure the financial means to buy out your shares and buy the company. Maybe you have a supplier or a customer or even a competitor who would be interested in acquiring you to gain further market share or synergies. Perhaps that you've developed something truly special and would really benefit from a public offering due to the public press, as well as access to further capital on a public market. The types of exit for you and your business all depend on the type of company that you are running, your vision, and the value that the shareholders perceive in it. So regardless of the type of exit that you'd be doing or your company might be suited for, Depending on the company that you have and the nature of the transaction, the information that a buyer will review can vary. But I want to go over a few of the key pieces of info that just about any buyer will want to see. So first off, as you can imagine, just about any savvy buyer will want to review your financial statements. Within those financial statements, if you have any unusual or one-off or personal expenses, buyers will want to see those items as they can increase or decrease the value of your company. A couple examples of some normalizing adjustments can be, well, say you pay out a large bonus to either yourself or family members for tax purposes, which is above what a market rate would be. If you were to adjust that bonus and pay someone else to do the job who wasn't related to you, that would increase your cash flows and therefore increase the company's value. Another common example of an adjustment here could be rent. So say you had a related party, say a real estate holding company, and you were to rent your office space from them at rates that were below the market rates. If you were to adjust that expense and rent from a third party at market rates, so that would naturally decrease your cash flows and decrease the value of the company. Ultimately here, buyers are going to want to know about any substantial revenue or expense in your company that's not core to your operations, so they can adjust their offers accordingly. So another point is buyers will want to see your tax returns. They'll want to review those, and some points that they'll want to understand is whether they might have tax loss carry forwards within your company, as I discussed, which they could pick up and have to their benefit, or whether there might be tax liabilities for issues that come up in the past that they might be taking on. So another item here is assets and real estate appraisals. So essentially, if you have any substantial assets in your company, and I'll use the example of real estate here, where fair market value is substantially different from book value, a buyer will likely want to see a real estate appraisal just to corroborate what that value is, since it will be different than what's on the books. Lastly, financial forecasts can also be crucial, especially if your company is growing and if your historical results are not representative of what you expect your future cash flows to be. Our colleague Sean Stager spoke about some best practices for forecasting in our first startup readiness presentation, and Ryan mentioned that again. And it's something that can be quite helpful to have strong management prepared forecasts when it comes time to selling your company. So with all that said, I want to share a few tips in terms of the exit phase and things that you can do to get the most value out of your company and reduce the stress before what's often a pretty hectic time when a transaction is about to happen. First off, I want to go back to the end game mindset that I mentioned earlier. Even if you don't intend to sell, it's important for you to always have a succession plan. It doesn't have to be formal, it can be informal, it can be a discussion, but at least have some kind of plan or an idea of how you might want to exit down the road. Secondly, buyers often look for companies with future growth potential. If your company has been building up earnings, or if you know that a major market change is going to take place that will increase demand for your products and services, or other good news items out there, it might be a good time for you to consider selling. Third point here is many companies have what some might refer to as a secret sauce or special processes or other intellectual property that sits within the founders and the core shareholder team. If you want to sell your business, this knowledge really has to be transferable. You can also increase the value of your company if you have proven processes to transfer that knowledge and really apply it within your company, that you also have trained employees that are able to use that information and transfer it onto a buyer. So that's really said for it to be a turnkey operation. If a buyer were to pick up your company and essentially have the other employees be able to run it for him and not need you to do it. Lastly, we're finding on our transactions that we've been doing that several buyers are expecting to see some form of due diligence before taking a company to market. What I mean by that is they can do some preparatory work, reviewing the financial statements, reviewing some of the key areas that a buyer will look at, and essentially be doing a little bit of homework before taking the company to market. This can be formal, this can require hiring another external expert, but it is helpful in any case to be prepared before taking that company to market. So another point here is due diligence. So really helping from where I said the sell side due diligence, from preparing from that, it's often coming to a point where the buyer will conduct due diligence, and that due diligence will reveal some items that will help them reduce their purchase price, which is often the aim of the buyer, to reduce the price. But that said, getting the assistance, as I mentioned, and being proactive with some due diligence and preparing internally can help you save time and be better prepared for a transaction down the road. So with that said, I want to hand it off to Ryan just to give a recap and close us off here.
Thanks a lot, Louis. So this presentation concludes our series on startup readiness, where we've essentially walked through the startup of a business life cycle, from seed funding to growth, maturity, and then a potential exit. In summary from today, we shared some insight into the vast number and types of changes both you as the entrepreneur and your business will undergo during the growth stage. We focus on what successful change looks like and ways to grow your business strategically. As in any endeavor we pursue, there are risks associated with our actions, and as a result, we provided some insight into the reputational risk of your company and then the ways to help mitigate those risks by having good financial hygiene practices. This is by no means a science, and as you run your business, you'll be faced with a number of challenges that will require you to think outside the box or seek external expertise. However, the end goal is to grow your company to a level where ultimately you are able to exit and obtain the most value for all the hard work you've put in since day one. On behalf of the team, we'd like to thank Natural Products Canada for providing us with the opportunity to present and the platform on which to do it, and for all in attendance today. We'd like to take a few minutes now and open up the floor for questions. However, if you have questions offline, please do not hesitate to reach out to us by email, phone, or even in person. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. That is such great information. Several times I thought I should interrupt you and ask a question because there's so much loaded into that. So I suspect that we might have people following up with you. I know a couple of people let me know that they had to leave right at the hour because they had other meetings. So I don't imagine I'm going to have a large list of questions from the participants right now, but don't be surprised if you get some. Fantastic information there, and I think your last section there about starting your business with the end game in mind really is the summarizing point, because everything that you were talking about is just a kind of a guidepost for building a really great business, thinking ahead to what is going to make you successful enough that you'll be able to exit at some point is exactly what's going to make you successful if you want to maintain and continue to grow your business on your own. So that was excellent, really great. So thank you very much for that. And thank you so much for the whole series, because it's been really informative. And for anybody who hasn't listened to the first two, I definitely recommend that you do. There's a whole process and sort of system to the way that all of this information was put together. And I think if you listen from start to finish, you would get a lot out of it. So again, this will be was recorded, and we'll have it up within about 24 hours. So you'll be able to listen to all three of them in succession if you have that much time, or take them piece by piece, because I know there's a lot to dig into there. So again, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And for now, have a great day, and thanks very much for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.